Anomalies. Anomalies.
Anomalies.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Anomalies. This is a program about things seen out of the corner of one's eye, about shadows and what lurks in those shadows. This is a program about the unexplained and the unexplainable.
Welcome to another episode of Anomalies, a program that tries to deal with kind of the outer limits, maybe that's the wrong word, of knowledge and what happens. Tonight, I'm really kind of excited by our program, not only for our guest, but one of our previous team members from Anomalies, Sara Rucker Thiessen, who I haven't seen for quite a while, has graciously consented to be back with us tonight. And so I'd like to welcome Sara on board. Good to see you again, Sara. Glad to have you here.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
Yeah, it is good. You bring gender equity and a lot of interesting insights. So tonight's guest is Chris Bader, and Chris and Sara, talking before we started our recording of our show, both have connections to the Evergreen State College. Sara worked there as an academic advisor, and Chris studied there. So Chris has written along with a couple of other folks. Carson Mencken is one of those co-authors. Mm-hmm. Who's the other one? I'm forgetting the third one. Okay, so they wrote a book called Paranormal America, and that's a book that, as a sociology guy myself, I glommed onto. And so I asked Chris if he would be okay with coming on our show tonight and talking about that book, because I think it gives some really interesting insights, sociological insights into what I'm fascinated by, and I think our audience will be fascinated by. So, Sara, since you're joining us again for the first time in a long time, do you want to be the first one to start with a question to Chris?
Well, actually, Chris's work is new to me, and I'm just sort of getting back into it. So, Chris, how about if I was going to sit down and have an interview with you with a cup of coffee, and I said, tell me about yourself, where would you begin?
Okay, that's an interesting question. If we're talking just strictly professionally, then I am a sociologist. I am a professor of sociology at Chapman University down here in Southern California, Orange, California. I'm from the Pacific Northwest. I grew up in near Seattle, Linwood, Washington, which some people may be familiar with. Went to the Evergreen State College for my undergraduate degree, got my PhD from the University of Washington. I'm a Seahawks fan. I think rain is the only way to live. So I am a displaced Northwesterner. I feel most at home in the Northwest. I've always been fascinated by the lore of the Northwest and the Sasquatch lore of the Northwest and paranormal events up there. So Dan and I had an immediate connection when we started discussing with each other when I realized your connections to the Northwest as well. So, but I got off on a Northwest tangent. Just quickly, I have certain areas of study. I study the sociology of religion. I study deviant behavior, criminology. Those three fields have led me into areas such as studying the paranormal from a sociological perspective.
Chris, is there something about the paranormal, and some of these stories are real common about, so why be drawn to that? What drew you to the paranormal as opposed to studying the criminal justice system or writing books about that? Maybe you did write a book about the criminal justice system, but I'm interested in the connection to the paranormal.
Yeah, great question. What was the link there that drew you?
Sure. Well, there's, and this is probably with all of our interests, especially if they align with your professional interests. There's the personal part and the professional part. The personal part is I just grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and I thought Bigfoot lived in my backyard growing up there, and so I grew up being fascinated by those stories, being fascinated by shows such as In Search Of. And it's hard to explain where that early fascination comes from. But later on, much later on, as someone who was interested in topics such as religion and deviant behavior, the paranormal fascinated me because it interested me how does the paranormal, how do ghosts, how do UFOs, how do those relate to, how are they similar and different to sort of more normative or typical religious forms like a Baptist church or a Methodist church? How are they the same? How are they different? And we could talk about what I see as the similarities and differences. And it really interests me studying the paranormal from a deviant standpoint because anyone who's had a paranormal experience or claims one or strongly believes in the paranormal knows that they're going to run into people who perceive them as strange or weirdos. And that fascinates me. I've gotten to know many people over my lifetime and over my time studying this who have claimed very close interactions with Bigfoot or claimed to have been abducted by aliens. And set aside whether those events really happened, how that affects your life to have that belief system is really fascinating to me. How do you work as a banker if you believe you saw Bigfoot in the woods the day before? And how do your coworkers treat you? Those issues really interest me. So it's one of those things where a long simmering personal interest happened to align with issues that interested me in what I was studying as a sociologist.
Have you had any paranormal experiences, Chris?
No, I have not.
Okay.
Well, it depends on who you ask, I guess. And the reason I make that clarification is I have been in the woods with Bigfoot hunters where they hear and I hear knocking on a tree. And to me, I'm not trying to be Mr. Skeptic in the room. I just don't know what that is. Literally don't know what that is. I'm not saying it's not a Bigfoot. I'm just saying I am not qualified to say what else makes noises like that in the woods. And when I've been in situations like that, I will say to the Bigfoot hunters, well, couldn't that be a woodpecker? And they'll sometimes get mad at me. And I'm literally not saying that to be a jerk. I just don't know the answer to the question.
Right.
I have been out with Bigfoot hunters when they've smelled things, and I've smelled them too, that they say are Sasquatch. To me, it's just a horrible smell. So I'm not trying to be cagey here. I'm just trying to say that if you asked some of the people I have been on excursions with, they would say, yes, he had an experience because he smelled that too. He heard that too. But I'm ambiguous about what those things actually are. What I can say for sure is never that dead-on, straight line of vision sighting of a Bigfoot. Never had a ghost grab me, talk in my ear, throw me around. Never seen the UFO. So nothing unambiguous, or if that answers the question.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to be skeptical, and we're sort of living in a time, I guess, where there is a lot of skepticism, which is it can be dangerous in the case of the vaccine, for instance, if people are not trusting that it's real. But I think doing our own research is, part of the key there, and looking in the right places for the right kinds of information.
Sure. Yeah,
Go ahead.
I agree with you. Sorry, go ahead, Daniel.
Well, I'm just going to say I'm kind of fascinated, too, about this idea of if you talk to people about some strange experience that you have, that's immediately a stigma. And a lot of people, therefore, will not talk to folks about strange experiences that they had. We just started a little group here in Olympia called the Olympia 14 Society, and if you're familiar with Charles Fort, probably get that. And part of the reason to do that was to make it more comfortable for people to talk about the strange experiences they have and not feel like they're being labeled with some kind of negative label. So I think that's really, really important, very important. You made a distinction in your book, Paranormal America, about, and to some degree it's gender-based, but it doesn't necessarily have to be, that the reasons that people pursue different paranormal kinds of things, for instance, going to a psychic versus joining MUFON or something like that, that there's a gender issue there, and also there's kind of like a what do you want to get out of this? So do you want to address that distinction? I think what I'm remembering is this discovery versus enlightenment piece that you talk about in Paranormal America.
Yeah, that's true. That what we found, just to be clear, in that book, we did surveys of the general public over a period of several years, and asked them about their paranormal beliefs, their paranormal experience, and their paranormal consumption. By consumption, I mean, are they reading books? Are they watching television shows? Are they going to conferences? And what we tended to find is just certain things clustered together. And what I mean by that is someone who said, yes, I believe in this, was more likely to say, yes, I also believe in that. And some of the clusters, we found this very distinctive cluster where there are certain things such as Bigfoot, UFOs, and ghosts, which people tended to cluster together there. Mm-hmm. And there were other things such as astrology, going to a psychic, ESP, those tended to cluster together. When I say cluster, I don't mean these are impermeable barriers. The paranormal is very messy, and people have interest in a lot of different things, but there was a tendency, and it was a significant tendency, for someone who said they were interested in ghosts, then I would just guess that they were also, if they were interested in something else, it was going to be Bigfoot or UFOs. If they said astrology, then I would guess, well, they're also going to be interested in either Atlantis or ESP or something like that. And so what we found with these clusters is that we named them Discovery and Enlightenment because it seemed like this one cluster that we found, it was about discovering if something is real. I'm going to go out and get this thing. I'm going to catch it. I'm going to document it. And that's what people get are most interested in, for the most part, when they're talking about ghosts and UFOs and Bigfoot. It's about, I want to see the evidence. Show me the video, or I'm going to go catch it myself. Whereas these issues like astrology and going to a psychic, those types of going to get your aura read, those types of things, they tend to be more internally based. I want to improve myself. I want to understand what my future is going to hold. I want to understand what happened in my past. I want to communicate with my higher angels to become a better person. So there's one that's sort of outward based. I want to go catch this thing. And another which is more inward based. And that's why we call them Discovery and Enlightenment. And we found they tended to group together, that if I was to group books in a bookstore, I'd group the Bigfoot books with the ghost books and the astrology books with the ESP books. And there also was a gender tendency there, meaning that, and these are just tendencies, there was a correlation there. And it was a powerful one. So if you just ask me to guess, where do I want to place my bets? If I find out you are a female and you're interested in the paranormal, then if I just want to have the best chance of getting my dollar back and making a little money, I'll guess that you're more likely to be into astrology and ESP than you are to be into Bigfoot and ghosts. I want to be clear, these are correlations. You know, there are plenty of women who are into Bigfoot and UFOs, plenty of men who are into psychic powers and astrology. It's just that other things didn't matter. Your race tells me very little about your paranormal interests, your racial or ethnic group. Your region of the country tells me very little. If I know you're from the South, I'm not going to try to guess what you're into. But other things do. And gender is one, religion is another. And so there are certain things, and gender was a big predictor of this Discovery versus Enlightenment divide. That was probably a very long and rambling answer. I apologize.
No, but I think it covered what you talked about in your book. So, Sarah, what would you say about that conclusion as far as gender preferences? Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Well, I would think, I don't know if you told us which gender went with which group or not, but if someone asked me, I would say guys are into Bigfoot, UFOs. I mean, if they're willing to be open-minded. And I would probably put ghosts and astrology and the spiritual realms with women.
That's mostly what we found. We found that that ghosts were more likely to be in this discovery camp, and the discovery folks were more likely to be men, and the Enlightenment folks were more likely to be females. Again, you know, the one thing I think we all know about the paranormal is the paranormal does not behave by any rules, and so these are tendencies. They are not hard and fast rules that we found. But there's other complications we can get into that's probably too into the weeds for what we want to talk about now. But we also have to think about, when we're thinking about the paranormal and trying to predict, that there's a great difference between just simply believing in something. I think Bigfoot might be real, having a related experience, and getting deeper into it, like actually going to conferences and going out on Bigfoot hunts. The further you get into something, the more pronounced those gender differences tend to be. In other words, if you go out in the woods with a bunch of people hunting for Bigfoot, you're going to find mostly men there. And the Bigfoot community knows this. They're actively trying to recruit more females into the mix. There have been some female Bigfoot hunting groups, and they make a big point of noting that they are female Bigfoot hunting groups because they're noting that they are rare within that field. So it also depends on what level we're talking about.
Yeah.
One of the things I found interesting that you just mentioned was the degree to which people get involved in stuff. So I know a lot of people who would like, they might watch a TV show about some paranormal topic. They might read a book about a paranormal topic, but when they go to a conference or a convention, it's like they've made a further commitment to that. And I think that's kind of interesting. And then the next thing you know, some of these people are joining groups, and that kind of describes me on some level. So what differentiates the degree to which a person is going to be involved in one of these paranormal pursuits?
Sure. In terms of sort of getting deeper and deeper into it, what we've found in, by we, I'm talking about myself, Carson, and Joseph have found, is a big predictor of that is an experience. That an experience can motivate you to just do the reading and watch the television shows. But we found amongst a lot of the people we talked to that what sort of got them deeper into it is when they had either a more dramatic experience than the one that got them interested in the first place, or their first actual experience. That I know many Bigfoot hunters personally who went from watching the Patterson-Gimlin film once in a while on an episode of In Search Of to going out in the field with a gun after they saw one. That experience can be very traumatic, whether it's a UFO experience, a ghost experience, a psychic experience. If you have a dramatic personal experience related to one of these fields, that can be one of those drivers. That's one of the few we found that wasn't just idiosyncratic. Another big driver that gets you into any kind of group, not just a paranormal group, but a religious group, any sort of group, are just the contacts that you have. A lot of people who get more deeply involved, if it's not you that's had the experience, it's because a friend is a member of that group and draws you in. Your networks are a big predictor of where you end up. One of the things that's going to draw you further in is you're building a network. So you're just 5 years from now, you're going to be deeper than you are right now.
Which the people who know me would probably think I'm pretty far gone already. So
okay, maybe you don't have anywhere left to go.
Yeah, and that could be true. So there's no relationship. You didn't say any relationship between income and whichever paranormal pursuit that you adopt. What about education? Are people who are more educated or less educated, are they more likely to be drawn to the paranormal in general or some specific aspect of the paranormal?
Yeah, there are some, the patterns there are a little bit idiosyncratic. I know that the popular statement will be, oh, well, it's only uneducated people to get into paranormal. And that's simply not true. That's a stereotype. There are some patterns there, and frankly, I don't know. Some of these patterns we just see them, they're revealed to us in the data, and we don't quite have a reason. We don't really understand why it is. I can tell you that ghosts tend to be something that there's a negative relationship with education. The lower your level of education, the more likely you are to believe in ghosts. And that is one where if you ask me why, I don't have a why for you. There are certain things that I just sort of know to be true in the statistical sense because I see them over and over and over again in surveys and different types of surveys, so that I'm become more and more confident that this is a true relationship, not some idiosyncratic thing from one survey. It's always triangulation, seeing if it's coming from multiple places. Other things such as UFOs, that's related to higher levels of education. If you have a higher level of education, you're more likely to believe in UFOs. Higher levels of education are more likely to believe in lots of psychic phenomena. So that I never talk about a general education effect because it's kind of messy. There's certain things where it's related to it, certain things it's not. Bigfoot hunting is belief in Bigfoot is negatively related to education. So it's quite varied. But I will tell you this, that one of the reasons we wrote the book was to address stereotypes about the paranormal. And one of those stereotypes is that I'll just state it as the stereotype states it. People have paranormal experiences because they're too uneducated to know better. That's the stereotype, right? It's the negative stigma that's attached to the paranormal. That is just simply not true. I wouldn't believe that stereotype was true even if we had found a consistent relationship with education. But what I can tell you is that the statistics don't support the argument regardless. It's just simply not true.
And I think that's one of the reasons we're experimenting with this Olympia 14 Society, is to take away, once again, the negative stereotype of if you have a weird experience, you can't talk to anybody about it. And if you do talk to anybody about it, you're going to be marginalized. So I think that's important, very important.
I'm kind of curious. Oh,
yeah,
go ahead.
Sorry. No, I just said there is a big stigma associated with the paranormal.
Yeah.
That stigma does depend on level of involvement. I mean, that the stigma about simply believing that some of these things could be true, particularly with UFOs and some other issues such as ghosts, the stigma of just simply saying they could be true, showing some level of belief, has been going down a little bit over time. But claiming the experience is still going to bring a lot of stigma, and showing too much interest is also going to bring you a lot of stigma still. Yeah.
One thing I'm curious about is so you're at a university, do you feel like there's a stigma related to your research and this book? I mean, how does the academic community view spending time looking into this?
Yeah, no, there's definitely been a lot of people make a lot of assumptions about me and about what my thoughts are and my work, and yes, my advisors tried to steer me away from doing this type of work, but I just didn't really care about those things. But I can just tell you some of the thing that people generally assume about. I get two main reactions. One reaction is they just assume that I believe all of this stuff, and that's the reason why I study it. It's a bizarre assumption, but people make it about the paranormal. There are all kinds of sociologists who are studying crime who are not criminals, who are studying, but there's something about the paranormal where it's assumed if you show any interest, even an academic interest, it must come from a level of belief. People assume all the time that I can help them with their paranormal problem. I get calls quite a bit about the ghost in someone's house. I've had numerous professors reveal to me their paranormal experiences in private, always in private because of the stigma. Yeah. The other reaction I get is a very strong reaction I've gotten from sort of the hardcore skeptical camp is I've gotten very negative reactions that I don't simply state in my books that I think all this stuff is not true. Which I find absolutely baffling because there's my perspective on this stuff. I don't know if you want to get into my perspective on the truth question when it comes to the paranormal. But
Sure.
My perspective on it is, as a sociologist, it doesn't matter. Because let's assume that UFOs are real. Let's assume that UFOs are not. That we could somehow objectively conclude both things. Either way, something really fascinating as a sociologist is happening. A bunch of people believe in it. It affects their lives to a great degree. It causes all of this stigma. Therefore, the black box of whether UFOs exist as a sociologist means nothing to me. Not that I don't have a long, boiling personal interest from growing up watching In Search Of with these questions, but as a sociologist, I ask exactly the same questions, do exactly the same things, whether it's true or not. And I study religion as well. And I don't ever spend my time trying to prove or disprove God's existence. What a waste of time that would be.
Right.
People feel somehow that because I study the paranormal, I should in every chapter say, by the way, also this is not real. Yeah. I have had a lot of problems with negative book reviews, that sort of thing, from the sort of skeptical camp, because they feel it's my responsibility as an academic to state that this stuff is not real. And the thing that people have a hard time understanding from my perspective as a sociologist is when I go into the haunted house, I don't actually care if the ghost is there.
Yeah.
That I care that people think the ghost is there.
Right.
And the other thing that people get mad at when I say is, perhaps the ghost is there. I can't answer that question, but I can say, you're really interesting to watch. So
yeah. So I want to share something that I did that kind of resonates with that. You're probably familiar with the BFRO, Bigfoot Field Research Organization. So I went with them, not from the standpoint of looking at it sociologically. I was trying to see if I could find Bigfoot. I went to Vancouver Island with a bunch of people looking for Bigfoot. And as you're saying, Chris, truly the most interesting part of that experience, and we didn't see Bigfoot at all, were the people that I met. I mean, there were people, there was an professor emeritus of anthropology from UCLA there, and I found him really fascinating. There was some guy who was dressed totally in camouflage, and my perspective on that guy was he was there to see if he could find and mate with the Bigfoot. So it was just an interesting variety of people. And like I said, no Bigfoot, but hanging out with all those folks and getting a sense of who they were and why they were there, that was totally fascinating.
Yeah, that's and I find the same thing fascinating. Absolutely, that I'm absolutely fascinated in the lives of Bigfoot hunters, the lives of ghost hunters, the lives of people who have UFO experiences and psychic experiences, and whether or not those. I want to make sure I state this carefully, because it's not that I think these things don't exist. It's just that that's not part of my work.
Yeah.
It's not what I do, and I'm not even qualified to do it. That if I have been on Bigfoot hunts where the Bigfoot hunters have shown me a footprint, and they believe that a Bigfoot has come around our camp and shown me that, and it's cool. I mean, it's a footprint looking thing, but it's not that I'm being skeptical. It's just saying I literally am not qualified to say that couldn't be a deer sliding in its own track. What is that? Could a bear make that? I don't know. And so I don't try to answer those questions. I answer the people questions. So,
which are maybe easier to answer. Sara, what else is on your mind?
Well, I was just thinking that I respect that. It seems like a good way to look at a lot of things, to not judge it, but maybe just try to experience what people are observing, or, just, I don't know, it just seems like a healthy way to look at the world, not decide that these people are kooks or like, how could you prove these things? How can you do it? Just like, how do you prove that God exists? So I'm just sort of really respecting where you're coming from there. It seems like as a sociologist, that would be your job.
Well, when I'm teaching my classes, one thing I tell my students when we're trying to figure out different groups and subcultures is I have a little saying that crazy is lazy. That if you just look at someone's behavior or beliefs or experiences and decide that they are crazy or a kook or whatever term you want to use for it, that is intellectual laziness. That is actually removing from yourself the requirement that you try to understand where they're coming from and why they're doing the things that they're doing. And I always try to tell my students, everything has an internal logic. You may not believe it yourself, but people are not crazy. They have internal logic. They're doing this for a reason because of beliefs they've developed over time, experiences they've had. And if you can't take the time to discover it, that's on you, not them. You can't just call someone a kook.
Yeah. Well, that's very wise, because I hate to keep referring back to what's happening with COVID, but so many people are angry and shaming and calling people who won't get vaccinated, idiots. And, it probably is more important to try to figure out why they believe it. And
it is if you want to change, try to change something. Yeah.
Right.
Right.
I get angry. I get angry too. When I'm watching the news, I will just say, what a bunch of idiots about something that I've seen.
Yeah.
But yeah, sociologists know that that you have to try to understand, if you want to change the behavior, if you want to try to have some effect on behavior, you can call somebody stupid as much as you want, but you have to, that's not going to do any good. You've got to understand their internal logic, the reasoning that they are using, and try to appeal to them on that level. So
Yeah.
You know, you said something that reminds me of a recent show we did. We did a show with Ralph Blumenthal, who you may know, a New York Times reporter, who wrote a book about John Mack, the believer, and it's a very fascinating book. But the connection here was what Mack had to go through at Harvard to essentially keep his job. So when you teach a class at Chapman, do you give like a sociology of the paranormal class, or do you intermix that with a more traditional type of class? That's one thing I was wondering about.
yeah, no, that's a good question. I do not have a sociology of the paranormal class just because I don't know. I'm not sure what I would do for 16 weeks. So because I mean, this is getting into sociology, but I don't think that I would want to do a history of the paranormal class as a sociologist. So I talk about the paranormal in different ways in every class that I teach because I love talking about it. So in deviant behavior, I talk about the stigma that's associated with paranormal beliefs and how different paranormal subcultures navigate that, because they do in different ways. And in my religion class, I talk about, well, we've got all these other things that are about gods and goddesses. Where does the paranormal fit into sort of the overall mapping of spirituality? So I should say though that unlike Mack or Jeffrey Meldrum or other people, I'm not going to face that issue because I'm not making any claims about the reality of the phenomenon. So it's just not what I do. I mean, you know, Jeffrey Meldrum has gone out there and made statements about the reality of Bigfoot, and Mack made statements about the reality of these abduction experiences. That's a different place than where I am. Anyone who came into my class, they would only see me talking about, here's what people believe, here's what they've experienced. They wouldn't see a reality statement tacked onto it. So I won't face that same type of stigma.
Right.
And I'm already tenured. I can do whatever the hell I want.
Well, that's one of the advantages of being tenured.
You know, I was thinking, because we were talking about Evergreen earlier, that an Evergreen, for listeners that may not know, has an interdisciplinary curriculum where faculty will work on a theme. A faculty from diverse areas of the liberal arts will work on a theme to explore with their students. So at Evergreen, I could see something like the sociology of the paranormal, but you would probably have, you know, a film element. How is the paranormal depicted through film, literature? I don't know, that maybe there'd be scientific component. Of course, writing is key at Evergreen, but that would be fun to do a mix.
Yes, absolutely. That I could completely see that, a popular culture component, a history component. That I would have no trouble filling up an interdisciplinary class on the paranormal.
Yeah,
it's just trying to I've never been able to figure out a good way. I mean, we're on a semester system here, to have 16 weeks of material that's not very repetitive, at least repetitive themes where all I'm switching is the entity that's been seen for 16 weeks. So
that's a long time.
Yeah, a long time.
And I don't have to worry about that because I'm retired from teaching. But and Sara actually was a conduit for this. I've taught several community education classes through the Senior Center and Olympia Parks and Rec, and have done just what you're talking about, kind of taken an interdisciplinary approach to the paranormal and trying to weave in different themes in different ways. So I guess there are avenues out there, but the structure of academia doesn't necessarily make that very easy to do.
Well, and you know, to be clear, it's not just that I'm shackled. It's that I I want to make sure that my students coming through my classes are getting the basics they need and the basic understanding of the core concepts of sociology. So,
Right.
And that's important to me to feel like I've done a good job doing that. And that constricts that desire I feel on my own for what I should be teaching. That pedagogy, if you want to call it that, does constrict how I teach things and does keep me from bringing in a popular culture component, a historical component. In my religion class, I don't talk about the history of religion. We don't go through Christianity from the road to Damascus, all the way through. That's for a theology class, So just as a sociologist, I approach things in certain ways, which I've never quite lent themselves to an entire course on the paranormal. I have been asked to lecture on the sociology of the paranormal for many times, and that's something that really works well. But
have you ever done a TED Talk?
I have not, no.
Okay.
I haven't done.
That could be interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. Let's see, what was I thinking about? The connection between religion and the paranormal. I think I shared with you an email that I've been a part of 2 ghost hunting groups, both of which have been here in Washington State. And one of the interesting things I saw there was sociological, is that people who start having weird experiences, I don't know what you call them, poltergeist experiences or weird haunting experiences, that there are filters that they view those experiences through. And one of the tendencies was, if the person tended to be pretty religious, well, obviously that's demonic activity that's causing all this. And then the people who were less so in terms of religion were just saying, hey, it's just weird stuff we need to find out about. So talk about the connection between religion and the paranormal, what your research has shown there.
Sure. I mean, I'm really keyed off of something you just said. So let me say something more general there first, that what I find that's really fascinating as a sociologist is, I think we can all agree, and I found that different paranormal groups know this. They talk about it themselves, that whatever is in that house, whatever is in the woods, different groups with different perspectives are going to see and find different things. And paranormal groups make jokes about this themselves. Bigfoot hunting groups believe Bigfoot's either some sort of cannibal or a friendly forest giant, and everywhere in between. And this 2 different groups can go to the same area. One's swapping peanut butter with Bigfoot. One's afraid that it's yelling at them and going to eat them. And same with ghosts. That it's well known. I have a lot of ghost hunting friends in the Southern California community here, and they joke openly about how, well, that group finds a demon in every house. So we definitely know whatever the paranormal is, there is a sociology layer to it. If someone goes into that house believing a demon is there, that's probably what they're going to find. If someone goes into a house believing it's Uncle Ted, that's probably what they're going to find. What we don't know is what's really there, whether it was Uncle Ted or Beelzebub or whatever, but or nothing. But in terms of religion and the paranormal, it really fascinates me, because what makes the paranormal really unique is, I call it doubly damned, because what the paranormal is a set of phenomena that are rejected by both religion and science, and that's what makes paranormal unique. Because if you think about something like Bigfoot, there is no church of Bigfoot yet. Maybe there will be someday. If you go to your church and bring up Bigfoot, your pastor will either say, well, that's not something we talk about here. Or if you go to a certain church, may say, that's demonic, stop talking about it. It depends on the church you go to. Science also, again, we realize that there are some scientists who believe in Bigfoot, but science as an institution also rejects the idea of Bigfoot. So that's what makes the paranormal unique, is that with a few rare exceptions, there are some UFO cults out there. UFOs are in the same position, that you go to a typical, most Americans who are religious are Christian of some form or another. About 80% or more of Americans. Now that's a huge range of things, from really conservative Southern Baptists and Pentecostals to really liberal Episcopalians. But most Americans are Christian of some form or another. If you go to your pastor and ask them about UFOs, your pastor is most likely going to say, if you're in a more progressive group, that's just whatever. That's not something we talk about. You're in the wrong place. If you go to a really conservative Christian group, they're going to tell you that UFOs are actually demons in disguise. One of my favorite things to do is go to conservative Christian bookstores and go to their paranormal section. They write a lot about UFOs. They just say that UFOs are demons.
Right.
that the thing that's getting you out of your bed is a demon, and it's tricking you. It's drawing you away from Jesus by making you believe that aliens are real, that type of thing. And most scientists still don't believe in UFOs. So I find that that's one of the things that's really interesting about the paranormal. Most paranormal groups are trying to find a way to navigate the fact that they are situated between religion and science. Some paranormal groups really go the sort of quasi-scientific route, wave around a lot of instruments and make up all kinds of scientific terms. Others go the more religious route and make themselves into more of a quasi-religious organization. But basically, and some try to do both at once. But paranormal groups are oftentimes taking themselves in one way or the other. And most paranormalists who've had a paranormal know this. They know that that this is the Bigfoot group that goes out and tries to psychically communicate with their Bigfoot brother. These are the ones that go out there with guns and heat detectors. That these groups tend to take a different role. But in terms of religion in general, let's just say that I had a paranormal book and I wanted to sell it to a religious person. Who do I want to try to sell it to? Who am I going to sell the most copies to? It's a person who's moderately religious. And that's the person in the United States who is the most paranormal, someone who's moderately religious. What do I mean by that? If you are someone who is going to church 3 times a week at the Jehovah's Witnesses, you're giving all your money to the Jehovah's Witnesses, they're a very conservative, serious group. You're a very serious and dedicated religious person. You are not going to be into the paranormal. Jehovah's Witnesses are never into the paranormal other than saying it's demons. If you are someone who is very irreligious, you have no interest in religious matters, you have no interest in questions about what's beyond us, then that also is going to tend to make you less paranormal, because you're showing a general tendency to have little interest in the spiritual. In other words, atheists aren't very paranormal. At the other end of the extreme, very conservative Pentecostals are not very paranormal. It's those people in the middle. If I want to find a paranormal person to sell a book to or something, I want to find that person who's going every once in a while to their United Methodist Church, which is a fairly progressive organization. Someone who's going on Christmas and Easter and a couple other times when they feel guilty. Someone who interprets the Bible fairly liberally.
Metaphorically.
Metaphorically. Yeah. That's what I mean by moderately religious. They are someone who is showing an interest and a dedication to religion, but they haven't put all their eggs in a specific basket that says, we have the literal word of God and everything else is outside of our purview. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So on every religion measure, whether it's how often you attend church, whether you believe the Bible is a book of stories versus the literally God's word, every one of these religion measures, it's the people that are right in the middle that tend to be the most paranormal, tend to be the most likely to believe in the paranormal, most likely to have experienced it. So it's a moderate effect. The further you get away from that religious moderation, the less likely you are to be paranormal in every direction. The closer you get to atheism, the less likely you are to be paranormal. The closer you get to, in the U.S., evangelical Protestantism, the less likely you are to be paranormal.
I have been a member of MUFON on and off in the past. I remember I had an extended family member. I was visiting I grew up in Idaho and was over here visiting in Washington. And I wanted to go to the MUFON International Symposium. And I asked this family member to give me a ride from, I don't know, I guess we were someplace in Seattle to wherever the convention was going on. And she was really troubled. And she, by the way, was, as I said, was a Jehovah's Witness. She was very troubled that I was going to a MUFON meeting because she felt it was all demonic, and that's that kind of correlation that you were talking about. So, yeah, I've seen that.
Well, that's one of the things I find most fascinating is that about sort of religion and the paranormal is that it's possible to believe in the paranormal but not believe it is what people say it is. And that's what the very conservative religious people are doing. They're saying, yes, people see UFOs. Yes, people see Bigfoot. Yes, people see ghosts. It's just the devil. It's just the devil disguising himself as those things. It's a really fascinating position because atheists and skeptics just deny the experience happened altogether. You were just mistaken. You were lying. But there's a whole segment of our society who say, yes, these things happen, but that's just the devil. And we hear these arguments growing up. Who hasn't heard that, oh, don't play with the Ouija board. It's going to bring the devil in.
Right.
You know. So we've heard these arguments before. It's just the very conservative religious groups in our country take that to a bigger level, where there's entire books in my office behind me here that talk about how in the things that the UFO contactees heard that were about how Jesus is really from the stars. Those are satanic messages, because that's the devil convincing you that Jesus is not what the Bible says Jesus is. So religious groups can see the same messages but interpret them different ways.
Right. Okay, I'm going to take a risk here and ask a question that feels like a risk. So I remember when I was in graduate school, we stumbled across Schrodinger's cat.
Oh, Schrodinger's cat, right?
Yes. Chris, are you familiar with that? Or
I am, yes.
okay.
Yes. Oh, my internet's going weird here.
We're getting a little freezing on Chris. Or Dan, am I freezing?
No, you're not.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm freezing. I was freezing a little bit.
Chris,
I was hearing you all fine, but I was just seeing myself freezing.
So I guess so it's Schrodinger's cat is some kind of thought experiment, apparently, that's in the quantum physics realm. But I guess my question is, and I may have all this wrong, but isn't it about, so there's a cat in a box, and is the cat alive or is the cat dead? And I was just thinking, like, in a way, it seems like that's kind of the realm we're in. Is the ghost real or is the ghost not real? But can you help me out here with, is there any kind of analogy to Schrodinger's cat, do you think? Or am I off base here?
I can see how there would be. I mean, all I can answer it is from my perspective, and it always sounds harsh when I say it, which is, I don't care about the cat, I don't care about the ghost, whether it's real or not, because the people are still there. I care that there's people who believe in it. And that's a very harsh kind of way to say it, just simply because of what I study. I'm someone who, I'm a Fortean. I've been a subscriber to the Fortean Times of 14 or Fortean. I never know how to pronounce it. But, I've been a subscriber to that for as long as I can remember. I'm fascinated by ghost tales. Stick me in a haunted house, I want to be in it. But from what I'm studying, it doesn't become kind of a Schrodinger's cat issue, because to me, what I see is ghost is there, ghost is not there. I'm probably seeing the same stuff.
Right. I'm just wondering, though, it's like, is that thought experiment about the observer and what's going on with them? Like, why do some think it's alive and some think it's dead?
Well, we're getting more into quantum issues that I'm not as familiar with, but it is less about the observer and more about something being able to hold multiple states.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
Whereas I am really about sort of the observer. A dark coat in the closet is a ghost if someone looks at it and thinks it's a ghost, as far as I'm concerned, as a sociologist. Whereas a ghost hunter wants to determine whether that person saw a coat or a real ghost.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
We can talk about ghost cats if you want. Yeah. If there's the pile of clothes on your floor a ghost cat or just a pile of clothes? The ghost hunter is interested in the answer to that question. I just care about what the person thought. So
yeah. Go ahead.
No, Sarah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, as a kid, an open closet was really scary to me when the lights were off.
Yeah.
Just a little aside there. Go ahead, Dan.
So I was thinking about this observer effect, and Chris has shared a couple things. I'll just let him respond to the first question. So one of the things I learned in sociology is if you've done field research with ghost hunting groups and UFO groups and that. So how is that the presence of someone? This is the participant observer kind of a situation. How has your presence modified the behavior of the people that you're observing? What are your conclusions about that?
Sure. I mean, the first thing I can say is I wish it wouldn't, but it always does. What I've found is that when I'm there, people are really tend to try to sound more scientific and are really very concerned with not appearing weird, and they think just by the virtue of me being there that I'm probably judging them as an academic, and so they reflexively I've found, and again I wish they wouldn't, but because I want to see natural behavior, but you can't help it. You observe someone, they know they're being watched, their behavior changes. But I have definitely found that they will try to frame what they're talking about in more what they perceive as more scientific ways. They will tend to censor themselves a bit. That when I know what their story is, but they're telling their story to me, they will oftentimes censor what they perceive or clearly perceive themselves as the more outlandish elements. I've had people tell me Bigfoot stories where they just leave out the part where Bigfoot psychically communicated with them, because I guess they're perceiving that I might believe in the Bigfoot, but not that's too far.
Too far-fetched.
So there's definitely a lot of trying to impress me. That I see when I go on these things a hunger, a sort of that I see that people wish they would get academics to pay more attention to them, and so generally they're excited that I'm there, but they're also paying a lot of attention to me more than I wish they would, because they want me to come away thinking what they saw was. I try to say to them that's not why I'm here, to determine the reality, but a lot of groups that I go with, they wish that I would come out of there having had that dramatic experience and then advocating for them. I always volunteer to go into the most haunted room. If the room has a demon in it, throw me in there, whatever. I'll go in there alone. There's usually the groups will usually encourage me to do that in many cases, because they're hoping that I will have that dramatic paranormal experience, which will then make me turn from an academic to an advocate.
Which would be a problem for your profession, maybe.
Be a big problem for me, yeah. No, it's one of the issues that I wonder about all the time, and my co-authors and I joke about it, that we hope you're the one who sees a Bigfoot full on, so that we can turn and study you, because it would be a disaster for me to see a Bigfoot full on, because then I've lost the objectivity that I think allows me to study this from a sociological perspective.
Right.
I am fascinated by the idea of Bigfoot and ghosts and UFOs and if they could be real. But if I have that experience, I don't think I can do what I do anymore. I have to stop studying it, because what I won't do is sort of advocate sociology, because I very firmly believe that as a sociologist, I should not be addressing the truth claims underneath these things. So if I ever, that's when you would know, I guess, that I had something happen to me, when you just see me just stop. And I won't do it anymore.
Right.
But it's a possibility. It is a possibility, because I don't know whether these things are real or not, that one day, and I do desperately try to get myself into the most active locations. If you know, Daniel or Sarah, where Bigfoot is right now, coming up to somebody's house every time and knocking on their door, that's where I want to be. And so that raises the possibility that one day it will happen to me. And that would, Sarah, you nailed it right. It's not the stigma that worries me. It's just I couldn't do what I'm doing anymore. It would be.
Yeah.
Share with Sarah. This is in the messenger exchange we had earlier today, that you actually participate in a ghost investigation of the building that you're in right now, right? Didn't you tell me that? Tell us about that.
Sure. Yes, the building we're in right now. This is an institute that I have that my office is in, and it's a lot of the institutes in Chapman are in small houses that Chapman has built that are historical houses, so they can't tear them down. Chapman would love to tear it down and put up a high rise, but they can't. So they buy these houses and put institutes in them. So many of these houses are very old, have a history to them. This house that I'm in, other people who work here, never me, it never happens to me, but they started experiencing things that they were framing as a ghost. Our admin assistant here, when she was alone, would hear what she perceived as footsteps coming towards her, sometimes voices. She said that at night when she was trying to leave, the lights she would turn the lights off and they would turn back on by themselves. She got so frightened, she just started talking to it and saying when she left, you can have the lights on if you want. And one of the other people who has an office in the back here started saying that the doorknob in his closet was just rattling on its own as if someone was trying to get out. So I had these people. Sorry, there's someone walking around outside. It's not the ghost. But I had people in the office start to come to me and talk to me in that sort of confidence, like, please don't think I'm crazy, but this stuff is going on. It's really scaring us. So I offered to bring my ghost hunter friends here. And I offer to do that for anybody because I believe at the very least, ghost hunters are a placebo effect. That either there's a ghost here and the ghost hunters come in and get rid of it, or the ghost hunters come in and wave their equipment around and people start perceiving the noises in a different way because they're convinced the ghost is gone. I think either way the person feels better, so I've got no problem bringing a ghost hunter into the place. So we did. We brought in a whole team of ghost hunters. I was with them until 2 a.m. They communicated with the ghost. They had an exorcism here, and after that, the ghost was gone, in the sense that nobody here ever reports anything anymore. So I was kind of sad, actually. I really liked the idea of working in the institute with a pet ghost, and I wasn't bothered by it. It never left me alone, and I would have thought it was kind of cool. I mean, what cooler thing than for me to work in a building with a ghost? But now it's supposedly gone. Nobody ever reports anything anymore. So that all happened right here.
Wow.
So what was the exorcism part of that? What was that like? What did they do to exorcise? Did they actually bring religious people in? Or
one of the members of the ghost hunting crew still is a devout Catholic.
Oh, okay.
And based on what they were hearing in their EVP sessions, they thought that he decided on his own, basically. He went up to the front of the building. I was not aware this was happening until it was almost done. Otherwise, I would have watched. Or maybe told him to stop, leave him alone. I want the ghost in the building. But did a Catholic exorcism rite in there that was supposed to make the ghost leave. Actually, he called me that night once we all left and went our separate ways. He called me at about 2 a.m. and told me that there was that a woman was in his hallway giggling, and he thought that the ghost had followed him home. So I said, "Well, that sounds a whole lot like a you problem, not a me problem." And But he did another exorcism in his place, and it went away. But he believed it followed him from this institute home. And then he had to get rid of it. So
the hitchhiker effect, which seems to be part of that. Well, we're coming to the end of our time here. I want to be respectful of Chris's other obligations. Sara, do you have any final thoughts or questions for Chris? And then we'll let him make some summary statements if he wants to. And
great. Yeah, one of my questions is, let's see. So when you are watching, you, the observer, are watching people engage with what they think is paranormal activity, are you taking notes? Are you watching facial expressions? What are you doing as the sociologist?
It depends on the setting and sort of the restrictions of the setting. That depending on what I'm allowed to do by the group that I'm with, I'm taking photos, I'm recording things. It depends on how obtrusive what I want to do would be. That in situations where I feel like if I'm seen taking notes, that's going to lead people to behave differently, then I don't do it. And last Bigfoot hunt I was on, I could tell that if I started taking notes, it was going to change the behavior of the people I was watching. So I would just watch everything for a couple of hours, then go hide in my tent and just barf out a series of notes, everything I could remember, just stream of consciousness before I forgot it all. It's a combination of things. I'm trying to observe as much as I can. If I can, I'm trying to document. I'm taking pictures. If they're in an EVP session, for example, something that seems to merit me wanting to record it, I'm trying to record myself. And I'm able to record because everybody's recording. It's not being disruptive. Right. So it really depends upon the setting. But oftentimes, because people do, especially because they're watching me, unfortunately, as soon as I take out that notepad, boom, all eyes turn to me. What is he writing down? Is he writing down that I'm a weirdo? That kind of thing that I generally just have to store as much as I can up here. And I usually, when I'm observing something, I'm up until all hours of the night because I've got to just get it all out of my head as soon as possible, because I can't tell you the number of times where my memory doesn't match my notes, where 10 years later, if you ask me a story, I will say, oh, well, we were driving around in a van and we did this, and I'll go back and look at my notes and we were in a sedan. Little things like that, your memory just changes over time. So I just try to, the most important thing if you're doing an observation is you have to, as soon as possible, just sit down and take a long amount of time and not trying to make it a written document that flows nicely. You just got to barf out as many memories and thoughts as you can, as quickly as you can.
It kind of reminds me of being an anthropologist, or there's a kind of anthropology, I don't know what it's called exactly, but where you study people in their environments or something. But
ethnography.
Ethnography, thank you. Yeah. I learned that word at Evergreen, by the way.
Ethnography is very big at Evergreen, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, anything else, sir?
From me?
Yeah.
No, I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you, Chris.
Well, I'm not so sure we're going to get Dave back. I thought we would, but sounds like his family situation is taking over. So we might just have to leave the recording. He'll be recording, but there won't be anybody here. But Chris, I want to thank you very much for taking time to be with us. And are you going to continue your research in the paranormal?
Oh, absolutely. What I'm doing, well, first of all, yes, I'm assuming, Daniel and Sara, that you're going to find me some active Bigfoot location the three of us will go to together sometime when I'm up.
Yes.
But it's a pretty active area up there, up Olympia towards Grays Harbor County. There's a lot going on.
It is very active.
I do not know the Olympic Project well and some of those other groups. I would love to have them get me, let me in on some of those things. There's always a trust barrier because they think I'm going to make fun of them or something. Hopefully, if there are people advocating for me, they would realize that's not what I do. I've never written some sort of one of those silly pieces where look at the Bigfoot hunters. It's just that stuff's annoying. But what I'm doing now is I'm starting to expand into other countries. I just completed a large-scale survey of paranormal beliefs in the United Kingdom, trying to see if the patterns that we see in the United States are the same patterns we see elsewhere. Is there still this gender breakdown we see? Is there still this religion relationship? Or is that something that's unique to U.S. culture is what I want to try to find out. So
any preliminary thoughts about that?
Got the data yesterday, so I don't know yet.
Too early. Too early.
I believe that we're going to find the same pattern. Not the same patterns of belief. There's different things that we're asking about, different types of things. We're asking about UFOs and Bigfoot, but we're also asking about leprechauns in the UK. So there'll be different things that we're asking about. But I believe, and I will be surprised if the patterns we find with relationship to religion and the paranormal, the patterns we find about this distinction between discovery and enlightenment, that those don't hold. We'll see. There's also a lot of similarities between UK and US culture. So they could hold in the UK, but they might not hold once I get to Italy, which is the next place that we're playing.
Awesome.
Very interesting, yeah.
Are you sure this isn't a way you're going to travel the world? Legitimate way.
Well,
I'm certainly hoping that I get invitations to different, to the most haunted places. I mean, that's, stick me in the room. I'll go in. Put me in the room with Jimmy the Demon or whatever. I'll go in. Just invite me. So.
Well, just so you know, Dave and I think Sara to a certain degree, we have a bunch of contacts with groups here in Washington. Particularly, I'm thinking of ghost hunters and MUFON types like Experiencer. I was part of the Experiencer resources team for a while. So if you're interested in developing some contacts, we could pass along some names of people who would be receptive to this. But I want to thank you for being on with us, and I found it very, very fascinating.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris.
All right.
And if
maybe we can do a part 2 after Italy.
Yeah, or maybe we could go to Italy with you or some strange thing.
Yeah.
If you ever come to Olympia, which you may, I think I feel comfortable in saying that Sara and David, I would take you out to dinner and we could have a face-to-face conversation about this kind of stuff. That would be enjoyable. But thanks a lot for being on the program. Chris, take care, and thanks again for being on.
Have a nice evening, Chris.
See you later.
All right, bye-bye.